Chapter 1. The Scent of Rot. The forest floor offered a quiet sort of truth. Here, under the damp canopy of ancient oaks, Lara's silence wasn't a flaw. It was a language. The snap of a twig beneath her boot spoke of carelessness. The whisper of wind through the leaves carried warnings of changing weather. She understood these things better than words, because words had failed her long ago, leaving behind only the ghost of a scream locked in her throat. Her fingers, stained with the green blood of crushed herbs, hovered over a patch of moon petal. Its silver-blue glow pulsed faintly, a secret heartbeat in the twilight. This was her worth. Not as an omega, a rank that earned her little more than dismissive glances, but as a healer. The only one who knew which roots could soothe a fever and which berries, if brewed just so, could dull the agony of a broken bone. She worked with a practiced efficiency, her mind a calm ocean of knowledge. Yet, a current of unease pulled at her from beneath the surface. For the past week, a new scent had tainted the air of the Blackwood territory. It was subtle, a metallic bitterness clinging to the underside of the moss, a smell like old blood and something else. Something unnatural that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It reminded her of that night. The memory came in jagged shards. The glint of too many eyes in the dark, the unnatural speed of the attackers, and a strange carved symbol on the hilt of a fallen dagger. They called them rogues, but the attack felt like a hunt, a precise, brutal extermination. Was she imagining the connection? Or was that old terror simply bleeding into her present? Lara gathered the last of the moon petal into her leather pouch, the familiar weight a small comfort. As she began the trek back toward the village, another scent reached her. The acrid tang of fear sweat. It was thick, unmistakable, and it was coming from the direction of the clearing. Her pace quickened, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the packed earth. 2 pack warriors, Yorick and Kale, were speaking in low, urgent tones, their broad shoulders hunched. 3 patrols gone missing along the Stonefang border, Yorick muttered, his voice a low rumble of anxiety. Alpha Marcus is pushing. He smells weakness. It's more than that, Kale countered, his gaze sweeping the trees as if he could feel Lara's presence. There's talk of sickness in their lands, a blight that makes the wolves bigger, faster, angrier. They say Marcus needs new territory because his own is turning to dust. A blight. The word settled like a stone in Lara's stomach. That unnatural bitterness in the air. It wasn't just blood. It was the smell of decay, the smell of rot. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not a simple border dispute. This was an infection, and it was spreading. She clutched her pouch of herbs tighter, the fragile petals a pathetic shield against the encroaching darkness. What good were remedies for fevers when a plague was bearing down on them? Her mind raced, connecting the whispers of a blight to the metallic scent, to the memory of those unnaturally fast rogues from her childhood. Were they all connected? A story no one else seemed to be reading? The thought was a terrifying one, isolating her further in her silent world. She was a keeper of secrets, a reader of signs. But who would listen to the girl who couldn't speak? The warriors' voices faded as they moved on, leaving Lara alone with her terrifying epiphany. The threat from the Stonefang pack wasn't just a challenge to their territory. It was the symptom of a much deeper sickness. And it was coming for them all. Chapter 2. A King's Shadow. Following that initial dread, a week passed in a haze of strained silence. The fear in the Blackwood pack became a physical thing, a tightness in the air, a scent of stale sweat and anxiety that clung to the inside of the communal longhouse. Meals were eaten quickly, eyes darting toward the tree line. Every snap of a branch from the forest was a potential attack, every shadow a Stonefang warrior. Lara's own unease had sharpened into a blade's edge. The blight. The word haunted her. She saw its phantom touch everywhere, in the slight yellowing of the leaves at the edge of their territory, in the way the river seemed to run a little slower, a little muddier. No one else seemed to notice because their fear was focused on the immediate, on the snarling face of Alpha Marcus. Then came the official word. An emissary from the Stonefang pack arrived, not with a declaration of war, but with an ultimatum slick with condescending pity. Alpha Marcus would absorb the Blackwood pack. Their lands would become his, their warriors would kneel, and their resources would be forfeit. The alternative was annihilation. The news ripped through the settlement like a shockwave, leaving stunned silence in its wake. Lara watched from the doorway of the healing hut as her Alpha, a man whose pride was as brittle as old wood, seemed to shrink before her very eyes. His face was a mask of grim resignation. They were too small, too poor, too weak. This was not a fight they could win. Amidst the rising panic, a different story trickled in, carried by a traveling merchant seeking refuge. It was a tale from the heart of the continent, from the glittering, dangerous capital of the Crimson Moon Empire. The Alpha King, Zacharias, a ruler known more by his fearsome reputation than by his face, was behaving erratically. He had abandoned his court, they said. He was traveling the lands alone, disguised as a common wanderer. Why? No one knew for sure. Some whispered he was searching for a prophesied cure to a creeping sickness in the capital, a sickness that sounded eerily similar to the blight Kale had described. Others claimed he was simply mad, broken by the weight of a crown he'd worn since the assassination of his father, a king afflicted with a hidden pain, a ruler who had shed his identity. It was a strange and unsettling story. Could their own troubles be a mere echo of a much larger crisis? The thought offered no comfort, only a sense of drowning in a conflict far too vast to comprehend. The world was sick, from the capital to their own small, forgotten corner of it. This realization solidified in Lara's mind as she listened to the pack's frantic arguments. They were trapped, a choice between slavery and death. Her own fate felt even smaller, even more insignificant. An Omega, and a silent one at that, would be less than a trophy in the Stonefang pack, a broken thing to be discarded. The walls of her world, already so small, were closing in until she could barely breathe. She felt a desperate, clawing need to run, to disappear into the forest where the truth was simpler, where the only threats were the ones she could see and smell and understand. Her Alpha's voice, strained and thin, cut through the din. We will give them our answer at the full moon. 3 days. They had 3 days until their world ended. The finality of it was a physical blow. Lara slipped away from the noise, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She needed herbs. She needed the familiar feel of dirt beneath her fingernails. She needed the illusion of control, just for a moment, because the absolute lack of it was a cage, and the bars were growing closer with every passing second. Her feet carried her toward the woods, a desperate flight from a fate she could not challenge. Chapter 3. The Stranger's Price. The forest that had always been her sanctuary now felt menacing. Every shadow seemed to mock her, a dark reminder of the larger darkness that was coming. Lara moved deeper into the woods, her breath catching in her throat, a sob of pure frustration building behind her silent lips. She was so focused on the roar of her own internal panic that she almost missed it. The scent of fresh blood, sharp and coppery, slicing through the damp air. It was accompanied by another smell, one that stopped her dead in her tracks. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, and ancient pines, and a raw, untamed power that made her wolf, dormant for a decade, stir in the depths of her soul. She followed the scent cautiously, her small knife clutched in her hand. There, in a small clearing, was a man. He was slumped against the base of an oak tree, a wicked-looking gash on his side bleeding sluggishly. He was huge, built with the kind of dense, powerful muscle that spoke of a life of conflict. His clothes were the simple leather of a wanderer, but they couldn't conceal the aura of command that radiated from him, even in his wounded state. But it was his scent that captivated her, that rooted her to the spot. It was a storm, wild and dangerous, yet beneath it was a note of profound loneliness, an ache that resonated with the hollow space in her own chest, And strangely, as she drew closer, the storm seemed to calm just a little. His head snapped up, and his eyes locked onto hers. They were not the eyes of a simple wanderer. They were the color of molten gold, intense and blazing with an intelligence that seemed to see right through her silence, past her trauma, and into the very core of her. There was no pity in his gaze, only a raw, startling focus. He didn't speak, just watched her, his breath coming in shallow pants. Lara's fear warred with the healer's instinct that was so deeply ingrained in her. This man was a predator. She knew it on a primal level. But he was also hurt. And for reasons she couldn't explain, the turmoil inside her own heart quieted in his presence. Slowly, she lowered her knife and approached him. She knelt, pulling out a bundle of clean moss and a salve from her pouch. His golden eyes tracked her every movement, a silent question in their depths. She worked quickly, her hands sure and steady as she cleaned the wound and applied the healing paste. He flinched when her fingers brushed his skin, a jolt like lightning passing between them, but he did not pull away. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. When she was done, she met his gaze and gave a small, hesitant nod. He returned it, a flicker of something, gratitude, surprise, in those incredible eyes. He was there for 2 days. He never told her his name, and she couldn't ask. They existed in a strange bubble of silence, a shared space where words were unnecessary. She brought him water and herbs. He watched over her with that unnerving, protective intensity while she foraged. She found herself breathing easier in his presence, the crushing weight of the Stone Fang ultimatum lifting, just slightly. Then, on the 3rd day, the day of the full moon, he was gone. But he didn't go far. He walked right into the Blackwood settlement, straight to her Alpha's longhouse, his wound now a healing scar. Lara watched from a distance, her heart pounding, as the stranger, this nameless, powerful enigma, made an offer. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shock on her Alpha's face, followed by a slow, greedy smile. The stranger pointed, his finger leveled directly at her. And Lara knew, with a terrifying, world-altering certainty, that he had just bought her. He had offered them salvation, and she was the price. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Word. The summons came not as a request, but as a command. 2 of the Alpha's guards stood outside her small hut, their expressions a mixture of awe and impatience. They didn't speak to her, just motioned with their heads toward the great longhouse. Every eye in the village followed her as she walked, a silent procession of one. The whispers were like flies buzzing at her ears. The stranger chose her? The silent one? Why? Lara kept her gaze fixed on the packed dirt path, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The air inside the longhouse was thick with the smells of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the suffocating scent of her Alpha's relief. He was practically glowing with it. Alpha Arlan sat on his carved chair, looking more like a king than he had in years. And beside him stood the stranger. He was even larger indoors, a mountain of quiet intensity that seemed to absorb the very light from the room. His golden eyes found hers the moment she entered, and they did not waver. They were not cruel or leering or pitying. They were just focused. It was the most unnerving thing she had ever experienced. To be seen so completely by a man she did not know was like being stripped bare in the middle of the village square. Lara, Alpha Arlan began, his voice slick with false warmth. Our guest has made a most generous offer, a truly remarkable proposition that will save our people from the clutches of the Stone Fang. He gestured to the stranger. He will lend us his strength, his resources. He will ensure our borders are secure, and in return, he asks for a marriage alliance to seal the pact. The Alpha paused, letting the words hang in the air. He was a terrible actor. His performance was for the benefit of his councilmen, who watched with greedy, hopeful expressions. The deal was already done. Lara could see it in the way Arlan avoided her gaze, in the finality of the stranger's stance. He stood there like a force of nature, an unmovable object, and his unwavering stare told her everything. This was not a negotiation, it was a declaration. She was property, a lamb being traded for the safety of the flock. The thought was a cold, smooth stone in her gut. She had spent her entire life being less than, a shadow, a burden. Now, in the blink of an eye, she had become their most valuable asset. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. Her gaze flickered to the stranger. Why? The question screamed in her mind. Why me? There were other Omegas, stronger ones, prettier ones. Ones who could speak and laugh and give an alpha the airs he would surely desire. What could he possibly want with a broken, silent girl whose only skill was knowing which plants could kill a man and which could save him? He has chosen you, Lara, the alpha finished, as if bestowing a great gift. The stranger said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier, more powerful than Arlen's booming voice. He just watched her, and in his gaze there was a strange, unsettling stillness, a calm at the center of the hurricane that was her life. He was the storm, and he was the eye of it, and he was waiting. He was waiting for the lamb to be delivered. Arlen dismissed her with a wave of his hand, a smug, satisfied smirk on his face. Go. Prepare yourself. Lara turned, her movements stiff, robotic. As she walked out of the longhouse, back into the open air, a single word echoed in her mind. Not saved. Not chosen. The only word she could hear over and over was sold. Chapter 5, A Choice of Cages. Back in the familiar confines of her hut, the world tilted on its axis. The scent of dried herbs, chamomile, willow bark, lavender, usually brought her comfort. Now it just smelled like the earth she was about to leave behind. She sank onto her cot, the rough-spun blanket coarse against her skin. Her body trembled, a storm of silent sobs she refused to let fall. What was there to cry about? A life of being overlooked was being traded for a life of being owned. Was it really so different? The thought was bleak, a dark pit of despair opening inside her. She felt a presence at her door and looked up to see Elder Anya, her face a web of concerned wrinkles. Anya entered without a word, sitting beside Lara on the small cot. The old woman's scent was of wood smoke and old wool, a smell of comfort and history. For a long moment, they just sat, the silence between them full of understanding. Finally, Anya reached out, her gnarled hand covering Lara's. It is a terrible thing. Anya's voice was a soft, reedy whisper. To have your path chosen for you. Lara's hands flew, her signs sharp and frantic. I have no path. I am a price, a thing to be traded. Anya's grip tightened. Are you? Or are you the one person who can save us? She paused, her gaze thoughtful. I have seen the way Alpha Marcus looks at our people. He is a cruel man, little pup. He breaks things for sport. Life under his rule, it would not be a life. It would be a slow death, especially for you. The truth of Anya's words was a cold shower. Lara knew what happened to Omegas in packs like the Stonefang. She would be used, abused, and discarded. A broken toy for a brutish alpha. It was a certain hell. This stranger, he was an unknown. She remembered his eyes. That intense golden stare held power. It held danger, but it had not held contempt. It had not held disgust. That, more than anything, was what stuck with her. She looked at Anya, her own eyes pleading for an answer that wasn't there. Why me? I do not know, Anya admitted softly. But he is not a simple warrior, that one. There is a weight to him, a power I have not felt before. Perhaps he sees the strength you hide, not the silence the others punish you for. Anya then reached into a fold of her dress and pulled out a small, smooth river stone, a tiny, faded spiral carved into its surface. This was your mother's. She said it was from her mother, and her mother before that. A charm for brave women facing unknown journeys. Lara took the stone, its coolness a shock against her warm palm. Her mother, a woman she barely remembered, a ghost from a story that ended in blood and darkness. Holding the stone, a strange resolve began to settle in her bones. Anya was right. This was a choice between two cages. One was small, familiar, and lined with spikes. The other was unknown, vast, and terrifying. But the door was not yet locked. She would choose the stranger because his cage might have a horizon she couldn't see yet. She would do it because it was the only way to ensure Anya and the others didn't end up in Marcus's prison. She would go because for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen not a burden, but a prize worth fighting for. And that was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly new feeling. Chapter 6. The First Step. The morning of the departure was gray and damp. A thick mist clung to the ground, muffling sound and swallowing the edges of the village. It felt like a funeral. The pack gathered in the main clearing, their faces a mixture of relief and guilt. They were being saved, and the price was this small, silent girl who had never harmed a soul. Lara stood before them, her few belongings bundled in a worn leather pack on her back. The river stone from Anya was tucked safely inside, a cold weight against her heart. She wore her simplest tunic, her hair braided tightly. She would not go to this stranger as a decorated offering. She would go as herself. The stranger, she still did not know his name, waited for her by the edge of the woods. He stood with an unnerving stillness, his back straight, his golden eyes scanning the crowd with an unreadable expression. He looked out of place, a great, dark hawk that had landed among a flock of sparrows. Alpha Arlan stood beside him, looking proud and smug. The ceremony, if it could be called that, was short. Arlan made a speech about unity and sacrifice, his words hollow and self-serving. Lara didn't listen. Her gaze was fixed on Elder Anya, who stood near the back, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it made Lara's own chest ache. When Arlan finished his speech, he looked at Lara. "Your consent is required to seal the pact." It was a farce, and everyone knew it. Her consent was irrelevant. But the ritual had to be observed. Lara walked forward, each step an act of will. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. She stopped before the stranger, forcing herself to meet his intense gaze. Up close, his scent was even more powerful, a heady mix of pine, ozone, and a clean, wild musk that made her head spin. She could feel the power rolling off him in waves, a physical presence that was both terrifying and strangely steadying. She gave a single, sharp nod. It was done. A collective sigh of relief went through the pack. The deal was sealed. Their savior would protect them. Lara turned and walked to Anya, pulling the old woman into a fierce, desperate hug. No words were needed. Anya pressed a small packet of dried ginger root into her hand. For the journey, she signed, her old fingers trembling slightly. "Be brave, little pup. You are stronger than you know." A tear escaped Lara's eye, the first she'd allowed herself to shed. She wiped it away angrily. She would not be weak. She turned back to the stranger. He inclined his head, a silent command to follow. As she fell into step beside him, he spoke for the first time, his voice a low, rumbling bass that vibrated through the soles of her feet. "They will not harm you again." It wasn't a platitude. It was a vow, a promise of protection from a man who had just purchased her. The contradiction was so stark it almost made her want to laugh. He was her owner, and he was her shield. She looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw and the impossible gold of his eyes, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the morning chill ran down her spine. They reached the edge of the territory, the invisible line between the world she knew and the one she was about to enter. He didn't pause. He just kept walking, and she followed. She did not look back. She was walking out of a cage, her feet taking the first step into the vast, terrifying unknown. Chapter 7. The Language of Silence. The first day of their journey was a lesson in just how vast silence could be. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of the forest, or the respectful hush of her healing hut. It was a chasm between them, wide and deep and echoing with everything she could not say and everything he would not. He walked with a long, ground-eating stride, forcing her to nearly jog to keep up. He was a presence, not a person. A walking storm cloud of secrets and power. Lara felt less like a bride and more like a piece of cargo being transported, her worth measured only by the fact that he kept her in his line of sight at all times. The promise he had made, "They will not harm you again," felt less like a comfort and more like a statement of ownership. By the second day, she was beginning to fray. Frustration was a hot, bitter weed growing in her throat. She needed to know where they were going, how long it would take, what kind of life awaited her. Was she to be a servant, a prisoner in a remote keep? The questions hammered against the inside of her skull with no way out. He stopped so abruptly she nearly collided with his back. He turned, his golden eyes studying her flushed face, the tense line of her shoulders. For a moment, she thought he was angry at her for slowing them down. Instead, he reached into the pack on his back and pulled out an object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it and held it out to her. It was a journal. The leather cover was smooth and dark, the pages within thick and creamy. Tucked into the binding was a slim charcoal pencil. Lara stared at it, her breath caught in her chest. It was not a command to speak. It was an invitation. A bridge offered across the chasm of her silence. Her fingers trembled as she took it from him. The leather was warm from his body. It was the first gift she had ever received that wasn't a handful of berries or a pretty feather. It was a voice. That night, huddled by the crackling warmth of a small fire, she dared to use it. The scratching of the charcoal on the page was loud in the quiet of the woods. Her handwriting was shaky at first. "Where are we going?" she wrote, and pushed the journal toward him. He leaned into the firelight, his broad shoulders eclipsing the flames. He read the words, and a moment later, his voice rumbled in the darkness. "To my home." It wasn't much, but it was a start. A crack in the wall of the unknown. She wrote again. "Is it far?" "Yes." His answers were short, clipped, but they were answers. It was a conversation of a kind. It was more than anyone in her pack had offered her in years. They had seen her silence as an emptiness to be ignored. This stranger, he was giving it a language. As the flames danced, painting flickering patterns on his hard face, she found herself studying him. The way he moved was not like a warrior, it was like a predator. He was constantly aware, his gaze sweeping the shadows, his body a coiled spring of readiness. He was more than he seemed, so much more. This simple journey felt like the calm surface of a deep, dark ocean, and she had no idea what monsters lurked beneath. Before she fell asleep, she wrote one last question, the most important one. "Why did you choose me?" He read the words, and his golden eyes lifted from the page to meet hers. The firelight turned them to liquid flames. He held her gaze for a long, thundering moment, but he did not answer. Chapter 8. A Promise in Blood. Several days bled into one another, falling into a tense but functional rhythm. He hunted with a silent, lethal efficiency. She foraged, identifying edible plants and useful herbs with the ease of long practice. They communicated through the journal, their silent conversations growing from simple questions to shared observations about the world around them. Yet her most important question, "Why me?" still hung unanswered in the air between them, a ghost at their campfire each night. She was beginning to think he would never answer it. The trust she felt was a fragile, unproven thing, like a seedling pushing up through rocky soil. Then the world exploded. One moment, they were walking through a dense, sun-dappled grove. The next, shadows detached themselves from the trees. There were 4 of them, clad in dark leather, moving with a silent, coordinated deadliness that spoke of long training. Not bandits, assassins. A flash of steel, a sickening crunch. The stranger moved like a phantom, a blur of motion that was brutally effective. He didn't waste a single step, his large hunting knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence. Lara scrambled back, terror stealing her breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She was useless, a liability. The thought spurred her to action. She wasn't a fighter, but she knew the forest. Her eyes darted around, landing on a patch of rust-colored fungi clinging to a fallen log. Devil's snuff. She scooped a handful of the dry spores into a leather pouch as the stranger dispatched a second attacker. While he engaged the third, the last one began to circle around, his eyes fixed on her. He saw her as the weak point. He was right. With a desperate prayer, Lara flung the contents of the pouch directly into the man's face. The effect was instantaneous. The man screamed, dropping his sword to claw at his eyes as the microscopic spores filled his lungs with fire. The distraction was all the stranger needed. He finished the third man and spun, his blade ending the threat of the fourth in a single, merciless arc. Silence descended, heavy and smelling of blood and sweat. He stood panting, his chest rising and falling. There was a shallow cut on his arm, dripping crimson onto the forest floor, and on the hilt of a dagger lying near one of the dead men, she saw it. A carved, spiraling symbol, the same one from her nightmares. The world tilted. Her hands shook as she approached him, pulling out her supplies. Their roles were reversed now. Her small hands worked to clean the cut on his powerful arm, her touch surprisingly steady. He watched her, his breathing evening out. The shared violence, the life-or-death reliance on each other had changed something between them. The air was charged, thick with unspoken things. When she finished, she looked up at him, her eyes wide with the remembered terror of the symbol. He must have seen the question there because his voice was a low, rough murmur when he finally spoke. He answered the question she had written in the journal days ago. "Because I saw strength," he said, his golden gaze burning into hers. Not weakness. The words landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. He saw strength in her, in the silent, broken girl. That night, she fell asleep closer to the fire, closer to him, the fragile seedling of her trust finally taking root in the blood-soaked soil. Chapter 9. The golden cage weeks passed. The journey across the land transformed the space between them. The silence was no longer a chasm. It was a comfortable quiet, a shared understanding that needed no words. He taught her how to track, how to read the signs of the wild. She showed him which plants healed and which could kill. The trust, born of blood and a shared fire, was real now. It was a solid, tangible thing. Lara found herself watching him, not with fear, but with a burgeoning curiosity that felt dangerously close to affection. A constant, humming awareness of him settled low in her belly, the way his muscles moved beneath his tunic, the low rumble of his voice when he answered her written questions, the sheer, solid presence of him that made her feel for the first time in her life, completely safe. The landscape began to change, the wild, tangled forests giving way to rolling hills and tidy, cultivated lands. The air itself felt different, cleaner and charged with a strange energy. They were getting closer to his home. She imagined a small keep, a rugged, fortified place befitting a man like him. A place where she could plant a garden, where her silence would be understood, where she could finally be at peace. The hope was a small, fluttering bird in her chest. One afternoon, they crested a high, wind-swept ridge, and she saw it. The hope in her chest died, strangled by sheer, breathtaking disbelief. Below them, nestled in a vast valley and climbing the sheer face of a mountain, was not a keep. It was a city of impossible grandeur. Gleaming white towers soared into the clouds, their peaks lost in the haze. Sunlight glinted off massive golden domes, and the entire metropolis was encircled by a colossal wall of black, volcanic rock that seemed to have been raised by gods, not men. It was a vision of power, wealth, and terrifying authority. "What is this place?" she wrote in her journal, her hand trembling so badly the words were nearly illegible. He stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he gazed down at the city. "My home," he said. The simple words were a lie, a monstrous, world-shattering lie. Dread, cold and heavy, began to pool in her stomach as they descended the ridge toward the city's main gate. It was a gate larger than her entire village's longhouse, flanked by armored guards whose polished steel armor shone like mirrors, and as they approached, the impossible happened. The guards, dozens of them, slammed their fists to their chests in a unified, thunderous salute. They dropped to one knee. The sound echoed like a crack of thunder, a wave of reverence and fear. And then came the roar, a sound from 1,000 throats at once, shaking the very stones beneath her feet. "Your Majesty! Welcome home, my king!" Majesty. King. The words didn't compute. She turned to the stranger, the man she had journeyed with, trusted and cared for. She looked at him, and the quiet wanderer was gone. In his place stood a figure of immense, terrifying power. The simple leather clothes could not conceal the aura of absolute command that now blazed from him. He was not just a warrior. He was Zacharias, the Alpha King, the man from the stories, the ruler of the entire continent. The fragile world she had built with him on the road, the trust, the safety, the hope. It all turned to dust and blew away on the wind. She wasn't his partner. She wasn't his bride. She was a political acquisition. And this beautiful, terrifying city wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage. Chapter 10. The Viper's Gaze. The days following their arrival bled into a haze of gilded captivity. Lara was given a suite of rooms so vast and opulent that she felt like a field mouse lost in a cathedral. Silks whispered against her skin, jewels glittered on velvet trays, and servants moved like ghosts, anticipating her every need before she knew she had one. It was a beautiful, suffocating prison. The man she had known as a stranger, the king now called Zacharias, had tried to speak with her. He had come to her chambers, his immense frame filling the doorway, his golden eyes pleading. She had turned her back on him each time, the silence she had once used as a shield now a weapon of her own. The betrayal was a shard of ice in her chest, too cold and sharp to be soothed by his rumbling apologies. Finally, she could hide no longer. A formal presentation to the court was required. Dressed in an emerald green gown that felt like a costume, she was led into the throne room. The sheer scale of the place was designed to intimidate. A ceiling painted with constellations soared overhead. Light streamed through impossibly tall stained glass windows, and the floor was a polished black marble that reflected the hundreds of predatory faces turned in her direction. The air was heavy with expensive perfume and the metallic tang of ambition. These were not people. They were wolves in silk, their smiles all teeth. Zeke sat on a massive throne of carved obsidian, looking every inch the powerful king he was. He watched her approach, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Beside the throne stood a woman of such breathtaking beauty that it was almost violent. She had hair the color of spun gold and eyes the shade of a stormy sea. Her gown was a cascade of silver, and she held herself with an elegant, bored arrogance. "Your Majesty," the woman said, her voice a melodic purr that did not reach her eyes. She turned her gaze to Lara. "May I present Duchess Valeriana?" "Lara," Zik's voice boomed, startling her. "This is the Duchess. She presides over the court." Valeriana's smile was a work of art, perfect and completely without warmth. She took Lara's hand, her touch as cold as a snake's skin. "A pleasure. The king has found himself a lovely little forest sprite. How quaint." Her eyes swept over Lara's simple braided hair, her bare face. "So very quiet. It must be a refreshing change after the complexities of a more refined life." The insult was perfectly wrapped in the silk of courtly language. It was a dismissal and a threat all in one. Lara met the Duchess's gaze and felt a jolt of pure, instinctual antipathy. This was a predator. one who enjoyed the slow, cruel game of breaking smaller creatures. But it was more than that. Valeriana's perfume, a cloying floral scent, had a strange undertone. It was faint, almost unnoticeable, but Lara's senses, honed by a life in the wild, picked it up. A bitter, metallic note that reminded her of rot. It was the smell of the blight. The connection was so shocking, so impossible, that Lara felt a wave of dizziness. She withdrew her hand, giving a small, stiff nod of acknowledgement. Valeriana's perfect smile tightened by a fraction of an inch. The Duchess saw a rival where Lara only saw a monster. The presentation continued, a blur of names and faces, but Lara couldn't shake the chilling encounter. As she was finally led away, she felt the weight of 100 hostile stares on her back, but one gaze burned hotter than the rest. She glanced back and saw Valeriana watching her, that beautiful, cold smile fixed on her face. It was the calculated, patient stare of a viper, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was not a forest of trees and streams. It was a jungle of shadows and poison. Chapter 11. The King's Claim. The grand feast was meant to be a celebration of their union. For Lara, it was a public execution of her spirit. She sat on a gilded chair beside Zik on a raised dais, overlooking a sea of courtiers. She felt like a doll on display, a silent curiosity for the kingdom to inspect. The air hummed with the murmur of 100 conversations, with the clinking of crystal and silver. But beneath it, she could feel the current of whispers, the sharp, unseen barbs of mockery and disdain. Zik was a stone wall beside her, his jaw tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his throne. He felt it too. The disrespect aimed at her was an arrow aimed at him. The feast dragged on. A parade of exotic foods she couldn't eat and fine wines she couldn't drink. Then, a nobleman, a powerful duke with a sneering mouth and a close alliance with Valeriana, rose to his feet, his goblet held high. "A toast!" His voice boomed, slick with false sincerity. "To our new queen." A smattering of polite applause followed. The duke smiled, his eyes glinting with malice as they landed on Lara. A kingdom as vast and powerful as the Crimson Moon Empire requires a strong queen. A queen with a noble bloodline, to be sure. A queen with a powerful voice, to offer wisdom and guidance to our great king. He paused, letting the insult hang in the air, thick and poisonous. One must ask, how is a silent commoner to command the respect of an empire? The hall fell into a dead, ringing silence. The challenge was a slap in the face to Zik, a public questioning of his choice, his authority. Lara's blood ran cold. She felt herself shrink, the weight of every stare pressing down on her. Zik did not move, not at first. He just sat there, his golden eyes fixed on the Duke. Then, something inside him seemed to snap. The air around the throne grew heavy, cold. A low sound, a guttural, terrifying growl that was not human, rumbled up from his chest. It vibrated through the floor, a primal sound of pure, unrestrained fury. He rose slowly to his feet, not as a king ascending his throne, but as a predator rising to its full, terrifying height. He placed a heavy, possessive hand on Lara's shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm of his rage. His golden eyes blazed, sweeping over the frozen, terrified court. When he spoke, his voice was not a shout. It was a low, lethal declaration, each word a hammer blow. Her respect is mine to command. He pulled her a half step closer, his grip a brand of ownership. Question her, and you answer to me. The growl was back, an underscore of violence in his voice. His gaze locked onto the pale, sweating Duke. She is this kingdom's queen, because she is my mate. The last two words were a shockwave. Mate. The fated bond, the sacred union, the one thing no wolf could deny. It was a truth more powerful than any law or title. The Duke stumbled back, his face ashen. The court was a sea of stunned, fearful faces. And Lara. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. She was caught in the tidal wave of his proclamation, trapped between the terror of his raw, untamed power and the shocking, undeniable safety of his claim. He had not just defended her. He had bound her to him, to his kingdom, with a word more powerful than any marriage vow. Chapter 12. A Bridge of Words. The chaos of the feast dissolved into a tense, humming silence as Zik led her from the great hall. He didn't drag her. His hand was firm on her arm, a guiding pressure that was both a tether and a cage. He dismissed the guards with a sharp gesture, and the heavy doors of their royal suite closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The vast, opulent room suddenly felt small, charged with the leftover energy of his primal declaration. He released her, and the absence of his touch left her skin feeling cold. He paced to the far side of the room, running a hand through his dark hair, the raw power from the feast slowly receding, leaving behind a man who looked utterly lost. Finally, he turned to face her. His golden eyes were stripped of their royal authority, filled now with a raw, desperate vulnerability. "I am sorry, Lara," he said, his voice rough. "For the lie. For all of it." The words were right, but they were too small to fill the chasm of his deception, too weak to mend the shattered pieces of her trust. She gave him no response. She couldn't. She walked to the large window, turning her back on him, her arms wrapping around her waist in a gesture of self-preservation. She stared out at the moonlit city, a kingdom of lights that felt more alien than the darkest part of the woods. He had lied about everything. How could one apology fix that? The next day, she refused to leave her chambers. She expected him to command her, to force her. He did not. Instead, a summons was delivered to the entire court. A formal session. Lara watched from a high, latticed balcony overlooking the throne room hidden in the shadows. She saw Zik walk to the center of the hall, not taking his throne. He stood before his people, a king choosing to be a man. "There has been a failing in my court," his voice boomed, clear and strong. "A failure of respect, a failure of understanding." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles, landing on Duchess Valeriana, whose face was a beautiful, serene mask of indifference. Communication takes many forms. A quiet truth is more powerful than a loud lie. And then, he did the most shocking thing of all. In front of the hundreds of powerful, judging wolves, he lifted his hands. His movements were clumsy, hesitant, but the meaning was unmistakable. He began to use the simple sign language she had taught him on their journey. He signed each word as he spoke it, his voice ringing with conviction, forcing them all to witness his humbling act. "My queen's thoughts have value." His gaze lifted, finding her in the shadows of the balcony. "You will learn her language." A collective gasp went through the court. It was not an apology whispered in a private room. It was a public declaration of her worth, a king humbling himself for his silent bride. It was a bridge, built of words he had learned from her, reaching across the chasm of his lie. Valeriana's serene mask finally cracked, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure, murderous fury. The battle lines were no longer just drawn. They were carved in stone. Lara stood frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth. She looked down at Zik, and for the first time since their arrival, she truly saw him again. Not the king, not the stranger. Just a man, flawed and powerful, trying to build a bridge back to her. His golden eyes, filled with a raw, pleading hope, met hers across the vast expanse of the throne room. And deep inside her, the wall of ice that had encased her heart began to groan under the pressure. A single tiny crack appeared. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Chapter 13. A Whisper of Rot. A fragile truce settled in the days following the king's decree. The court's behavior shifted from open scorn to a brittle, resentful courtesy. They bowed, They addressed her as Your Majesty, but their eyes still held the cold glint of dismissal. Lara felt less like a prisoner and more like a foreign creature introduced into a viper pit, temporarily protected by the zookeeper but still surrounded by fangs. The wall of ice around her heart had not melted, but Zik's public act of humility had sent a web of cracks through its surface. He had built a bridge. She had not yet decided if she was brave enough to cross it. The memory of the blight scent on Duchess Valeriana was a persistent, nagging ghost. It clung to the edges of her thoughts, a wrong note in the symphony of courtly deception. She could not ignore it. To do so would be to remain a pawn, a silent doll in a green dress. She had been reactive her entire life, surviving the ripples made by others. Now she made a choice. She would make her own. She would stop surviving and start fighting. Her greatest weakness, the fact that everyone underestimated her, that she moved through the castle like a shadow because she was not worth watching, would become her greatest weapon. That afternoon, she slipped into the royal library. The scale of the place was breathtaking. Shelves soared up into the gloom, reachable only by soaring spiral staircases, holding the collected knowledge of 1,000 years. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and dust. No one would think to look for the silent, commoner queen here. She navigated the labyrinth of shelves, her senses guiding her. She found the section she was looking for: apothecary arts, poisons, and arcane alchemy. She couldn't decipher the dense, spidery script of the texts, but she didn't need to. Her knowledge was older, more intuitive. It was in the shape of a leaf, the color of a root, the pattern of a flower's petals. Her fingers traced the illustrations in a heavy tome bound in snakeskin. And then she found it. A drawing of a flower so dark a purple it was almost black, its petals shaped like grasping claws. The umbral orchid. She could not read the description, but the detailed drawings beside it told their own story. Illustrations of wilting plants, of tainted water, of a gray, creeping decay that looked horrifyingly familiar. It was the blight. The book depicted a slow, creeping poison that mimicked natural decay, created from the distilled essence of this orchid. And a small note in the margin mentioned its unique, faintly metallic odor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. A connection. A thread to pull. But a drawing in a forgotten book was not proof. She needed more. She needed him. The thought was terrifying. To trust him with this, to rely on him, was to take the first step across the bridge he had built. It was to admit that she couldn't do this alone. It was the biggest risk she had ever taken. That evening, she took the journal he had given her. Her hand was steady now, her purpose clear. She wrote only one sentence, a summons and a plea. I need to show you something. In the library. It's about the blight. She left the journal on the small table between their adjoining chambers, a silent offering. She had just declared war on the most powerful woman in the kingdom, and her only ally was the man who had lied to her from the very beginning. Chapter 14. The confession at the door night had fallen, draping the citadel in shadows and secrets. Lara waited, her nerves a tangle of live wires. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shout from the courtyard made her jump. He had been gone for hours, attending to some matter of state. What if he didn't see the journal? What if he saw it and didn't care? The doubt was a cold poison, seeping into her newfound resolve. Then she heard the heavy tread of his boots in the adjoining room. Silence. A long, drawn-out moment where she imagined him reading her words. The door to her chambers opened. Zik stood there, the journal in his hand, his golden eyes grim and serious. He didn't ask what she meant, he didn't question her. He just gave her a single sharp nod. Lead the way. The shift in their dynamic was a palpable thing. He was the king, but in this moment, he was following her. They moved through the sleeping castle like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the cold marble floors. The library was a vast cavern of darkness, the moonlight through the high windows painting silver stripes on the shelves. She led him deep into the stacks, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She pulled out the heavy, snakeskin-bound tome and opened it to the page with the umbral orchid. She pointed, her finger trembling slightly. Zik leaned over, his presence a wall of warmth and power at her back. She could smell the scent of pine and the cold night air on his clothes. He read the dense text aloud, his voice a low, horrified whisper. The orchid's poison. It didn't just kill. It corrupted. It leached the life from the very soil, spread through water, and could be used to create an aura of sickness that weakened wolf shifters over time. The symptoms were a perfect, horrifying match for the kingdom's blight, and for the secret illness he carried within him. Back in the suffocating silence of their chambers, the truth of what she had discovered settled between them like a shroud. The blight was not a curse from the gods. It was a weapon, and someone was wielding it. This shared, terrible knowledge broke the last of the walls between them. He didn't pace. He didn't command. He just stood there, looking at her, his kingly mask stripped away to reveal the weary, haunted man beneath. The poison they used on my father. His voice was rough, broken. A piece of it is in me, Lara. It burns. It whispers. It makes the rage, so hard to control. He looked away, shame etched on his face. And when I am near you, it quiets. He finally sank to the floor, leaning his back against the heavy wooden door, making himself smaller, less threatening. A king, choosing the floor. I lied to you because I am a king, and kings cannot be weak. Because I did not want to chain you to a man who is half a monster. He finally looked at her, his golden eyes swimming with a pain so deep it stole her breath. But I was wrong. My greatest weakness is having to face this without you. The confession was raw, honest, and utterly disarming. It was the truth she had been owed. She walked towards him, her heart aching with a feeling she couldn't name. She knelt in front of him. She didn't write. She didn't need to. She reached out and took his large, calloused hand in both of hers. A simple touch, a silent promise. You are not alone. He gripped her hand like a drowning man holding a lifeline. And there, in the quiet darkness of the room, they were not a king and his queen. They were just Zik and Lara, a united front against the encroaching shadows. Chapter 15. The Scent of a Trap. A new current ran between them in the following days. It was a live wire of shared purpose and simmering tension. They were a team. They met in secret, late at night, poring over maps and ancient texts in the library. He brought his knowledge of the court, its players, and its politics. She brought her sharp, intuitive observations and her deep understanding of the natural world. Their silent conversations through the journal were now strategy sessions, their verbal exchanges filled with a new, easy intimacy. The physical awareness between them was a constant, powerful undercurrent, a promise of something more that neither of them dared to act upon. Not yet. Valeriana felt the shift. She was a predator, and she sensed the moment her prey began to develop fangs. The bond growing between the king and his silent bride was a threat to her power. Her attacks, once veiled in silken courtesy, became more direct. She questioned Zik's judgment in council meetings, her words dripping with concern for his unusual preoccupation with his new commoner mate. She was testing him, trying to isolate him, to drive a wedge back between them. But she was too late. The bridge between them was now fortified. Lara knew a drawing in a book was not enough. They needed tangible proof linking Valeriana to the umbral orchid. She remembered the metallic, rotten scent from the Duchess's perfume, a smell that now haunted her waking moments. The orchid's essence was the key. She formed a plan, a terrible, risky idea that made her stomach clench with fear. She needed to get closer to the viper. She approached Zik with her journal. I must learn the ways of the court, she wrote. I will ask the Duchess to teach me. She is the highest-ranking lady. It is my right to ask, and she cannot refuse without causing insult. Zik's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with protective fury. No, it's too dangerous. It is the only way, she insisted, her charcoal pressing hard into the page. She will not suspect me. I am the silent mouse. She will think it is a game. She will want to have me under her thumb. He argued, but he saw the determined set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He finally, reluctantly, agreed. As Lara predicted, Valeriana was both amused and delighted by the request. To have the king's little pet come to her for lessons? The arrogance and irony were too delicious to refuse. The lessons began in Valeriana's private solarium, a glass room filled with exotic, unnerving plants. The air was thick with the scent of cloying blossoms. For days, Lara endured Valeriana's condescending instruction on posture, etiquette, and courtly address. She played the part of the meek, overwhelmed commoner perfectly, and she sniffed the air. Always, she searched for that one scent. On the third day, she found it. It was faint, but it was there. That cold, metallic rot. It wasn't coming from Valeriana's perfume. It was coming from a small, ornate cabinet of dark wood, locked and standing in a shadowed corner of the room, her eyes fixed on it, her heart beginning to pound. The source. As her gaze lingered on the cabinet for a moment too long, Valeriana, who had been explaining the lineage of some forgotten duke, stopped speaking. The sudden silence was deafening. Lara looked up, and the Duchess's pleasant, instructive smile was gone. It was replaced by a look of pure, reptilian intelligence, her stormy eyes cold and sharp. "You are more clever than I thought, little mouse." Valeriana's voice was a soft, deadly hiss. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you sniffing around like a cur in my private rooms?" A soft click echoed through the solarium. The heavy oak door had just been locked from the outside. The game was over. Lara was trapped, alone, with the monster. Chapter 16. The Viper's Kiss. The solarium was no longer a room. It was a cage made of glass and fear. The heavy, sweet scent of the exotic flowers was suffocating, a perfume for a tomb. Valeriana stood before her, the pleasant mask of the Duchess completely gone, revealing the cold, ancient predator beneath. Her beauty was a weapon, sharp and without warmth. Lara stood her ground, her back straight. She would not give this monster the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Her silence, once a shield against pity, was now her only armor against a tyrant. "Remarkable," Valeriana purred, circling Lara like a shark. All this time, the key to unraveling a century of our family's work was a mute little omega from a dirt-poor pack on the fringe of the world. She laughed, a sound like crystal shattering. Fate does enjoy a vulgar little joke. She trailed a finger along the petal of a blood-red orchid. "This blight you're so concerned with? It's not a curse, it's a tool, a way to prune the weak to consolidate power. My family has guided this kingdom from the shadows for generations, ensuring the throne remains strong and compliant. We will not be undone by a stray the king found in the mud." Lara's mind raced, connecting the terrible dots. The cabal, the assassins, the rot spreading through the land. It was all her, all of them. This woman, this beautiful, smiling monster, was the architect of it all. "I see the question in your eyes," Valeriana continued, her smile widening. She stopped directly in front of Lara, her stormy gaze pinning her in place. "You want to know about your parents?" Lara flinched, a betrayal of her stony facade. Valeriana's smile became a triumphant sneer. "Oh, yes, I remember the reports. They were stubborn. Your mother had that same defiant look in her eyes, right before my father's men silenced her for good." The words were a physical blow, knocking the air from Lara's lungs, leaving her reeling in a world of silent agony. It wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a wound, carved into the very heart of her past. "Don't worry," Valeriana whispered, stepping closer. "I won't be so crude as to spill your blood on my floor." From a ring on her finger, a tiny, needle-sharp point of silver emerged, coated in a viscous, shimmering liquid. "This is a much more elegant solution. a poison of my own design, distilled from the very essence of the umbral orchid. It doesn't kill the body. It just snuffs out the soul. It severs the connection between the shifter and the wolf. She reached out, her movements impossibly fast. A fitting gift for you, I think. I call it the silence. A tiny pinprick on the side of her neck. It was almost painless. Lara stumbled back, her hand flying to the spot. Valeriana watched, her face alight with cruel victory. A cold numbness began to spread from the point of contact, a creeping frost invading her veins. The vibrant colors of the solarium began to fade, graying at the edges. The world grew quiet, muffled, and deep inside her, the comforting, instinctual presence of her wolf, the one she had only just begun to know, began to go still. It was fading, a dying echo in a vast, empty cavern. Chapter 17. The Echo of a Wolf. The connection snapped like a frayed rope. One moment, Zik was presiding over a tedious trade dispute, the faint, comforting awareness of Lara's presence a steady warmth at the back of his mind. The next, nothing. Just a cold, silent void where she had been. It was a feeling so shocking, so wrong, that he rose from his throne mid-sentence, a snarl tearing from his throat. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He didn't run. He moved like a storm front, a wave of pure, kinetic fury that sent guards and ministers scattering from his path. Her scent, chamomile and rain, was a ghost in the halls, leading him, pulling him. He found her in the solarium. She was slumped on the floor, her beautiful emerald gown pooled around her like wilted leaves. Her eyes were open but unfocused, seeing nothing. He knelt beside her, his heart a frozen lump of dread in his chest. "Lara?" he choked out. He touched her cheek. It was cold. He swept her into his arms, the lightness of her a terrifying testament to how much she had already faded. The scent of Valeriana's perfume and the bitter tang of the blight hung heavy in the air. He knew. He knew who had done this. A roar of pure, murderous rage echoed through the glass room, powerful enough to make the panes rattle in their frames. Back in their chambers, the royal healers were useless. They swarmed around her, their faces etched with fear and confusion. "There is no wound, Your Majesty," one stammered. "No fever. Her breathing is steady, but her life force, it is withdrawing. It is like a candle flame being slowly starved of air." The blight poison inside Zik, the dark passenger he carried, flared in response to his despair. It was a roaring agony, a fire in his veins that her presence could no longer soothe. She was too weak, too distant. The one cure for his own personal hell was being stolen from him, and he was powerless to stop it. He felt the rage building, the monstrous part of him wanting to tear down the castle stone by stone. Then, a very old healer, his face like a dried apple, touched Lara's hand, his eyes closing. He pulled back, as if burned. "It is the severing," he whispered, his voice trembling with a horror that was ancient and profound. "I have only read of it in the forbidden texts. An old dark magic. It does not kill the body. It unweaves the soul from the wolf. It leaves an empty echo." He looked at Zik, his old eyes full of pity. "There is no cure, save for a miracle." A miracle. The word was a mockery. But as Zik looked down at Lara's pale, still face, he knew he would tear the world apart to find one. He would challenge the gods themselves. There was one place, one last desperate hope. A place of ancient power, where the life force of the kingdom was said to be concentrated. A place of myth and legend. The sacred grotto. Without another word, he gathered her limp form back into his arms. He ran from the room, his long strides eating up the corridors. It was a desperate race against the fading light in her eyes, his own hope a dwindling ember with every beat of her slowing, weakening heart. Chapter 18. The Price of a Bloom. The sacred grotto was a place of deep, primordial magic, hidden in a cleft of the mountain behind the citadel. It should have been a riot of life, a place where the air hummed with energy and the scent of damp earth and wild blossoms. It was not. As Zik entered the cavern, a wave of despair washed over him. The grotto was dying. The glowing moss that should have carpeted the walls was a dull, sickly gray. The crystal-clear pool in the center was stagnant and murky. The blight, the creeping rot of his kingdom had reached even this holy place. It was a mirror of his own fading hope. He gently laid Lara upon the central altar, a great flat stone covered in what was now withered moss. Her breathing was shallow, a faint whisper in the oppressive silence of the cavern. He knelt beside her, his head bowed, his spirit broken. "Please," he begged, his voice a raw, ragged sound directed at the dying magic around them. "Anything, take my strength, take my life, just don't take her." But the magic of the grotto did not answer. Instead, at that very moment, a wave of profound sickness pulsed through the earth. Valeriana, confident in her victory, had begun her grand ritual, a ceremony to amplify her power and cement the blight's hold over the kingdom forever. The last vestiges of life in the grotto withered and died. The gray moss turned to black dust. The water in the pool thickened. A cold, final stillness descended. It was over. All was lost. A sound of pure, absolute agony tore itself from Zik's soul. It was not a king's cry of defeat. It was a wolf's howl of mourning for its mate, a sound of a world ending, of a heart being ripped in two. That sound, that raw, powerful wave of love and despair, was the one thing that could pierce the poison's veil. It found Lara, adrift in her cold, silent prison. It was a lifeline of pure emotion, a tether back to the world. It wrapped around the last, tiny, flickering ember of her spirit, of her wolf, and it fanned it into a roaring inferno. The grief of her mate, the agony of the dying land around her. It was a pain too great to remain silent. Power didn't just erupt from Lara. It detonated. It was not a gentle healing. It was a violent, explosive birth of life. A shockwave of pure energy blasted through the cavern. The black dust on the walls ignited into brilliant, glowing green moss. The stagnant pool flashed with pure, clean light. Flowers exploded into bloom on every surface, a riot of impossible color and life. Her silver wolf, the one she had seen once before, manifested above her, a shimmering creature made of moonlight and starlight. And her voice returned, not as a word, but as a song, a note of pure creation that pushed back the darkness. The victory was absolute, the reversal of fortune a miracle. But as the blinding light of her power subsided, something new appeared. On the far wall of the now vibrant grotto, ancient words began to carve themselves into the stone, glowing with golden light. It was the full prophecy, revealed at last. They read the familiar lines, but then their eyes fell upon the final, terrible sentence, the part that had been hidden for 1,000 years. The price for this great healing, the impossible choice. They stood together in a paradise of their own making, her hand in his, her body thrumming with newfound power. But they were staring at the glowing words on the wall, and the glorious triumph of the moment turned to cold, heavy ash in their mouths. The true despair, the real all-is-lost moment, had only just begun. Chapter 19, A Riddle in the Stone. The grotto, now a paradise of vibrant life, felt like a beautiful lie. Every perfect, glowing flower, every crystal-clear drop of water in the pool, was a testament to a power that came with an impossible price. Despair was a cold, heavy cloak settling over Lara's shoulders. She had found her voice only to be told she must surrender it. She had found a love that felt like destiny, only to learn their future might demand the sacrifice of their child. Beside her, Zik was a statue of contained fury and grief. He was a king, a being of immense power, and he was utterly helpless. He would have torn the stars from the sky for her, but he could not rewrite the words glowing on the ancient stone. "There has to be another way," he finally said, his voice raw. "I will not let this happen. I will not let you pay the price for my kingdom's salvation." He would sacrifice himself, she knew. He would find some way to throw himself between her and their cruel fate, and that, she realized, was a price she was not willing to pay. She pushed away from him, her bare feet silent on the mossy ground. She approached the wall, her fingers tracing the glowing ancient script. The words felt alive beneath her touch, humming with a power that was neither good nor evil. It simply was. Her life had been a riddle, a story of hidden meanings, of a strength that looked like weakness, of a silence that held more truth than 1,000 spoken words. Why would this prophecy be any different? Sacrifice the crown's heir, surrender her voice to the earth. Her mind, now clear and sharp, free from the fog of trauma and poison, saw the cracks in the literal meaning. A word was a vessel, capable of holding more than one truth. Her hands flew to the journal, which she had dropped in the grass. The charcoal moved with a frantic, desperate energy. "It's a riddle, Zick, not a command." He looked at her, his expression clouded with confusion and grief. "Words have more than one meaning," she wrote, her hand flying across the page. "An heir is not just a child. An heir is a future, a line of succession, the way things have always been done." She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a wild, brilliant idea. And to surrender something is not the same as having it stolen. A surrender is a choice, a gift. He stared at the words, his brow furrowed. He was a wolf of action, of direct commands and brute force. He saw a wall, and he planned to break through it. She saw a wall, and she was looking for the hidden door. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "What if the prophecy isn't a curse?" she wrote, her final words a plea for him to see. "What if it's a challenge to be better rulers, to change the world, not just save it?" As she finished, the glowing words on the stone wall seemed to pulse, the light growing warmer, brighter, as if in agreement. A gasp escaped Zick's lips as he saw it too. The oppressive weight of destiny began to lift, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of possibility. They were not trapped. They had a choice. The despair in his eyes was slowly burned away by a fierce, dangerous resolve that mirrored her own. They would not be fate's victims. They would be its masters. They left the grotto not as a defeated king and his cursed queen, but as partners, armed with a secret that could either save their world or shatter it completely. Chapter 20, The Queen's Gambit. The Citadel was abuzz with preparations for the Grand Gala, an annual event of stunning opulence. This year, Duchess Valeriana had overseen the arrangements, and the event was being spoken of in hushed, excited tones as a celebration of her triumph, a reassertion of her power at court. She did not know it would be her battlefield. The air in their private chambers was no longer filled with grief, but with the electric, humming energy of conspiracy. They were no longer just a king and his queen, they were revolutionaries, planning to overthrow 1,000 years of tradition in a single night. Maps were spread across the great oak table. Ancient texts lay open, their brittle pages whispering of old rituals. Zeke brought his knowledge of the castle's secret passages, of his council's loyalties and betrayals. Lara, with her newfound clarity, brought a strategic mind that was sharp, intuitive, and saw the angles he often missed. "Valeriana will be at the height of her arrogance," Zeke murmured, his finger tracing a path on a floor plan of the grand ballroom. "She believes you are broken again. She will not expect an attack." "She must be exposed publicly," Lara wrote in her journal, the charcoal scratching a sharp, determined rhythm. "Her confession must be heard by all. I will be the bait." Zick's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The protective fury was back in his eyes. "No, I will not risk you. I will confront her myself." "And she will deny it," Lara countered, her gaze unwavering. "She will twist your words. They will call you a tyrant, accusing a beloved duchess out of jealousy for your commoner mate. It must be me. She hurt me. She hurt my family. The confrontation is mine to claim. Her charcoal pressed hard into the page. She will not see me as a threat. She will see me as a mouse to be toyed with. And a mouse can get closer to the viper than a wolf ever could. He saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes. This was not just about saving the kingdom anymore. This was about justice. This was about the silent girl finally making the monster answer for its crimes. He finally nodded, his expression grim. The plan was set. It was a gambit of breathtaking audacity. Part 1. Lara would corner Valeriana, using the knowledge of her parents' murder as a blade to provoke the Duchess into a public outburst. Part 2. In the ensuing chaos, Zik would address the court. He would sacrifice the crown's heir by abolishing the absolute monarchy, establishing the Alpha Omega Council to ensure a future of balance, not singular power. Part 3. Lara would then surrender her voice to the earth by performing the Song of Life, a powerful healing ritual from the ancient texts, cleansing the land and Zik's own body of the last traces of the blight. It was a plan built on hope, love, and a desperate, brilliant interpretation of a riddle. It could save everything, or it could be the act that burned their world to the ground. That night, as they finalized the last details, he took the journal from her and set it aside. He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "This is not just a plan to save our kingdom," he said, his voice low with awe and a terror she understood completely. "It is the founding of a new one. And it all begins with your move, my queen." Chapter 21. The Gilded Battlefield. The night of the grand gala arrived, a swirl of music, glittering jewels, and whispered lies. The great ballroom of the Citadel was a breathtaking sight, a forest of marble columns and cascading crystal chandeliers. It was a beautiful, gilded battlefield, and Lara walked into it feeling not like a queen, but like a warrior. She wore a gown of spun silver that shimmered like moonlight on water, a color chosen to honor the wolf she now fully embraced. Her hair was unbound, a testament to her wild origins in a court that valued restraint. Beside her, Zik was a commanding presence in black and gold, his face a mask of regal calm that betrayed none of the furious energy humming beneath his skin. They entered the ballroom and a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to them. They were no longer the scandalous king and his silent commoner bride. They were a power couple, their bond a palpable thing that radiated from them in waves. They separated as planned, a king and queen moving through their court, each with a secret mission. Zik moved toward a group of powerful, wavering council members, his presence commanding, his words carefully chosen to plant the first seeds of doubt against the Duchess. Lara, for her part, did not hide in the shadows. She moved through the glittering throng with a newfound grace and purpose. Her silence, once a source of shame, was now her armor and her weapon. She met the gazes of the courtiers who had once scorned her, her calm, knowing stare making them falter and look away. She was not the forest mouse anymore. She was a silver wolf, and this was her hunt. She could feel Valeriana's eyes on her from across the room. The Duchess was holding court near the grand terrace, a radiant vision in blood-red silk, laughing and smiling, the very picture of confident power. She was a spider in the center of a vast, shimmering web, and she believed with all her arrogant heart that the fly had already been caught. Lara knew the Duchess would be watching, expecting a display of fear or submission. She gave her neither. The music swelled, a beautiful, haunting waltz. Couples took to the floor, a swirling river of color and light. The time was approaching. Lara saw Zik give her a subtle nod from across the room. The pieces were in place. It was time to spring the trap. She made her way through the dancing couples, her path a straight, deliberate line toward the winter garden, an alcove of frosted glass and pale moonlight just off the main ballroom. It was a place known for secret conversations. Just as she reached the entrance, Valeriana appeared, stepping out from behind a large marble pillar, as if she had been waiting. Her smile was a predatory slash of red in her perfect pale face. "Enjoying your last night, little stray?" she purred, her voice a low, mocking caress. "You wear your doom so prettily." Lara did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood before the most dangerous woman in the kingdom, the monster who had murdered her family and tried to destroy her soul. And she felt calm. The fear was gone, burned away by the cold, clear fire of her purpose. She lifted her hands, and in the silent, elegant language of her past, she made her first move in the war for their future. "I know," she signed, her movements slow and deliberate, for the Duchess alone to see. "What you did to my mother." The amused, condescending smile vanished from Valeriana's face. It was replaced by a flash of pure reptilian fury. The mask was off. The trap was sprung. Chapter 22. The Song of Life and Death. The air in the winter garden crackled. The silence stretched thin and tight, ready to snap. Valeriana's beautiful face, stripped of its courtly mask, was a contortion of pure, venomous rage. Lara's signed words, a truth from a buried past, were the spark that ignited the final inferno. The Duchess didn't scream or lunge. Her movement was a fluid, deadly hiss of silk and fury. She threw her hands out, not at Lara, but at the decorative, exotic plants that lined the alcove. "You want to see what my family taught me, little stray?" she snarled. "I will show you." Darkness erupted from the planters. It was not a growth, it was an explosion. Thorny, black vines dripping with the viscous, metallic-smelling poison of the blight shot out, twisting and writhing like a nest of serpents. They tore through the marble floor, their thorns screeching against the stone. The scent of decay, of the umbral orchid, flooded the ballroom, causing guests to scream and recoil in terror. At the same time, a dozen of the royal guard, their eyes clouded with a dark loyalty, drew their swords, moving to seal off the area, trapping them. "Lara!" Zik's roar was a battle cry. He moved to intercept the guards, a blur of gold and black, his own fury a match for their treason. He was a storm of flashing steel, a king fighting not for his throne, but for his mate. Lara saw him flinch, the dark magic in the air aggravating the old poison in his veins, but he did not falter. Lara stood at the heart of the erupting corruption, the thorny vines snaking toward her. She felt no fear, only a vast, clear purpose. She would not fight this death magic with more violence. She would unmake it. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and opened her mouth. It was not a word. It was not a scream. It was a sound, a single pure note that began as a low hum in her chest and swelled into a chord of impossible beauty and power. It was the song of life. As the note resonated through the ballroom, the air shimmered. The black, thorny vines recoiled as if burned. Their corrupt growth slowed, then stopped. The scent of rot was pushed back by a new fragrance, that of fresh earth, of spring rain, of new blooms. She walked forward, her silver gown now glowing with a soft internal light. She was an island of life in a sea of death. The song continued to pour from her, a shield and a weapon all in one. Zik fought with renewed vigor, the healing power of her song soothing the fire in his own blood. Valeriana stared, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Her power, the magic of decay and poison, was being unwritten by this silent girl's impossible song. Lara reached the Duchess. She did not strike. She did not choke. She simply placed the palm of her hand on Valeriana's forehead. The contact was gentle. The effect was cataclysmic. A torrent of stolen memories, of dark rituals, of whispered conspiracies flooded Lara's mind. She saw it all. The final, terrified moments of her parents' lives, the cold, calculating faces of the cabal, the full breadth of Valeriana's ambition and cruelty. The Duchess screamed, a high, thin sound, as the dark magic she had wielded for so long was purified, burned away by the pure, clean fire of Lara's life force. When Lara pulled her hand away, Valeriana collapsed to the floor, her power gone, leaving only a broken, empty woman. The black vines crumbled to dust. The corrupted guards fell, their dark loyalty broken. Zik stood panting amidst the fallen, his eyes fixed on Lara with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. The entire court, the whole world, stood in stunned, ringing silence, witness to a miracle. Chapter 23. The Sacrifice of a Crown. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum, filled with the awe and terror of what the court had just witnessed. The air, once thick with the scent of rot, was now clean and pure, carrying only the faint sweet smell of the ghost blooms that had withered to dust. Zik crossed the ruined marble floor, his eyes never leaving Lara. He came to her side, not as a king approaching his queen, but as a man reaching for the center of his universe. His hand found hers, his grip warm and steady, a silent question and a statement of unwavering support all in one. Before the shock could curdle into new plots, before factions could form in the power vacuum left by Valeriana's fall, Zik acted. He led Lara to the center of the ballroom, his voice ringing out with an authority that no one dared to challenge. "You have seen the work of a great darkness tonight," he boomed, his voice echoing in the vast, silent hall. "A poison that has seeped into the very heart of this kingdom, nurtured by a secret cabal and wielded by Duchess Valeriana. A sickness born of ambition, of a lust for singular absolute power." He told them everything. The story of the blight, of the cabal that had murdered his father and her parents, of the prophecy that had guided his desperate search. He laid the truth bare for all to see. Then, his golden eyes swept over the sea of stunned faces. The ancient prophecy foretold that to restore the balance, a great price must be paid. It demanded the sacrifice of the crown's heir. His voice rose, filled with a revolutionary fire. For 1,000 years, the crown, the power of this entire continent, has been passed down a single line of alphas. A tradition that has allowed darkness to fester in the shadows. A line that can be manipulated. A power that can be corrupted, as we have seen tonight. He raised their joined hands high. That tradition of singular, absolute power ends now. Lara stood beside him, her presence a quiet testament to the truth of his words. She was the other half of the equation, the living proof that power came in more than one form. "I sacrifice the idea of the singular heir," Zik declared, his voice a thunderous vow. "I hereby dissolve the old laws of succession. I establish a new royal council to be led not by one but by two, an alpha and an omega, together as the prophecy intended. Power will no longer be hoarded in a single bloodline. It will be shared. From this day forward, balance will be our law." It was a revolution in a single speech. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Murmurs of disbelief warred with looks of dawning, incredible hope. They had witnessed her impossible power. They had heard the truth of the kingdom's sickness. They could not deny the logic of his decree. It was radical. It was terrifying. And it felt impossibly right. The political sacrifice had been made. Zik turned to Lara, his eyes filled with a love so profound it made her heart ache and a fear she understood completely. His part was done. Now, only hers remained. Chapter 24. The Sound of a Healing World. All eyes were on her. The weight of their expectation was a physical thing, a heavy cloak on her shoulders. But for the first time in her life, it was not a burden. It was a mantle of responsibility she was ready to wear. This was not a command. It was not a price being extracted from her. This was her choice, her gift to the world, to the man she loved, to the future they would build together. She gave Zik's hand a final, reassuring squeeze and stepped forward alone. She closed her eyes, shutting out the hundreds of watching faces. She focused inward, and then outward. She reached out with her senses, with the newfound power thrumming in her veins, and felt the land. She could feel the blight, a weak but persistent fever in the earth, a lingering poison in the waterways, a faint echo of pain in Zik's own blood. She took a deep breath and began to sing. Her song had no words. It was a current of pure, healing energy, a melody woven from the threads of life itself. A soft, silver aura began to glow around her, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire ballroom, eclipsing the light of the crystal chandeliers. The court watched in breathless silence as waves of this silver energy pulsed out from her, flowing down through the marble floor, through the very foundations of the citadel, and spreading out across the kingdom like a healing tide. Zik, standing closest to her, felt the energy wash over him. The last, lingering trace of the blight poison inside him, the dark passenger he had carried for so long, dissolved into nothingness, leaving him feeling clean, whole, and truly free for the very first time. He watched her, his heart aching with a love too vast for words, as she poured all of herself into this final act. The song reached a glorious, soaring crescendo, a note of pure creation that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, and then, slowly, it faded. She poured the last whisper of her voice, the last drop of her energy, into the healing. The silver aura receded, a tide going out. Silence fell once more. The ritual was complete. She opened her eyes, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit serene. Zik rushed to her side, his hands gently holding her face. "Lara?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a love that needed no sound, and she could not answer. She had surrendered her voice to the earth. It was a silence of profound power, a silence of choice, a silence of peace. 6 months later. The sun was warm on the high balcony, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses and the distant sound of a bustling, happy city. The kingdom was healing. Its people were hopeful. Lara stood with Zik's arms wrapped around her, her head resting against his chest. She was radiant, her belly swollen with the promise of their child, the first heir of a new and balanced world. The silence had been a strange and peaceful time, a period of quiet communion with her mate, her kingdom, and herself. "The council is debating the new trade routes with the southern packs again," Zik murmured into her hair, his voice a low, happy rumble. "They are hopelessly deadlocked. They need their queen's wisdom." She tilted her head back to look up at him, a soft, secret smile playing on her lips. And in a voice that was quiet, a little rough from disuse, but as clear and beautiful as a silver bell, she spoke. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The gift had been a loan, not a permanent sacrifice, and the earth, now healed and grateful, had finally given it back. He stared at her, his golden eyes wide with shock and then dawning brilliant joy. He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss full of promise, of a shared future, of a love that had not just saved a kingdom, but had built a new one.